Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening for the whole hour by Douglas Chapman MP, the MP for Dunfermline and West Fife and SNP spokesperson on small business, enterprise and innovation. Douglas, how are you doing this evening?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thanks for inviting me on the show.
No, thank you for joining us. We are going to be talking to Douglas shortly about how we connect Scotland to the rest of Europe and beyond in the years post-Brexit and potentially post-independence. And we'll get down to that in just a few minutes. But first, we have the rest of today's headlines. And we start, as we always do, with our coronavirus update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 789,301 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 758,614 were confirmed negative, 30,687 were positive. There were 775 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly, 4 new reported deaths. This will, of course, be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone who has the virus will necessarily show symptoms, and not everyone who has symptoms will necessarily get tested. Although we do urge you, if you are showing symptoms of a new persistent cough, a fever, or a change in your sense of taste or smell, then please do book a test as quickly as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 175 people in hospital last night, 19 of whom were in intensive care. So the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 2,526. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show that 42,268 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 66 since yesterday. And this number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. Rishi Sunak is facing mounting pressure from the SNP and others to listen to sense and extend the furlough scheme after new figures revealed that up to 1.8 million workers in the UK could be made redundant when the job retention scheme ends in a few weeks. Following new Office for National Statistics research, which revealed that 11% of the workforce were still on the scheme through the middle of September, SNP Shadow Chancellor Alison Thewlis has again urged the Chancellor to reconsider ending the scheme. Economists fear that the unemployment rate could hit 12% when the scheme is fully withdrawn, and the Office for Budget Responsibility estimates that 20% of the 8.9 million people who were furloughed at the scheme's peak could now end up losing their jobs. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has expressed her anger and disappointment in Margaret Ferrier MP, who had the SNP whip withdrawn last night after it was revealed she had travelled to Westminster in breach of public health guidance after receiving a positive test for COVID-19. It's hard to express just how angry I feel on behalf of people across the country making hard sacrifices every day to help beat COVID, Sturgeon said on Twitter this morning. The rules apply to everyone and they're in place to keep people safe. The First Minister said Ferrier was a good friend and colleague, but that she should now step down as an MP. The White House tried to reassure Americans today that President Donald Trump was still working from isolation after his announcement yesterday that he had caught the coronavirus throwing the administration and presidential election campaign into uncertainty. Trump, who has played down the threat of the coronavirus pandemic from the outset, said he and his wife Melania had tested positive for the virus and were going into quarantine. Trump is experiencing mild symptoms of COVID-19 and is continuing to work in isolation, a White House official said, according to the Associated Press and the New York Times. 2 people familiar with him told the Times that they were cold-like symptoms. Ursula von der Leyen has described the most difficult parts of the Brexit negotiation as remaining completely open, but backed an intensification of talks ahead of a crunch video conference call with Boris Johnson. After the latest and last scheduled round of negotiations in Brussels on a trade and security deal, the European Commission President said there remained a lot of work to do, with fewer than 100 days left before the UK exits the single market and customs union. But the former German defence minister told journalists at the end of the EU summit, "Where there is a will, there is a way." Her comments came as a spokesman for the Prime Minister said Johnson would speak to the Commission President on Saturday afternoon to take stock of negotiations and discuss next steps. President Alexander Lukashenko's government announced that it had drawn up a list of people banned from entering Belarus in retaliation for sanctions imposed by the European Union today. After hours of summit talks, EU member states agreed to sanction about 40 Belarusian officials accused of rigging the August 9th presidential election that handed Lukashenko a sixth term and sparked a wave of mass protests and general strikes. Belarus did not name the officials on its sanctions lists or which countries they were from. A Russian journalist died earlier today after setting herself on fire in front of the local branch of the Interior Ministry in the city of Nizhny Novgorod, a day after her apartment was searched by police, according to local media. Prior to her self-immolation, Irina Slavina wrote on her Facebook page, "I ask you to blame the Russian Federation for my death." The incident comes just weeks after another opposition politician and journalist, Alexei Navalny, was apparently poisoned with a nerve agent on an internal flight from Siberia. A nationwide voluntary survey of education staff in schools or early learning and childcare settings will help identify whether those tested are likely to have had coronavirus. The COVID-19 antibody survey in education staff will help identify the proportion of people working in an education setting who have had COVID-19 by testing for antibodies in their blood. People working in education can expect to hear about how to sign up for the survey through their employers and professional associations in the coming weeks. People who have been hospitalised with coronavirus will have access to a new national peer support network to help their recovery and rehabilitation. Backed by almost £200,000 of Scottish Government funding, the charity ICU Steps will connect ICU survivors and their families across Scotland to facilitate patient-led support groups, as well as offering a range of well-being resources to help with recovery. It follows the publication of a report showing that up to 1/3 of patients admitted to hospital developed serious mental health consequences, including depression, anxiety, PTSD, and cognitive problems. And finally, a new study has found that business leaders across the UK are confident that their companies would thrive in an independent Scotland. The Ipsos Murray survey, which interviewed 102 business leaders across the UK between February and July, discovered little resistance to the concept of an independent Scotland. It revealed that 95% of business leaders are confident that my company would adapt to the consequences if Scotland became an independent country, with just 4% saying they didn't believe Scotland would become independent. So that is all the news, and just before I go on any further, if you would like to comment on any of those stories or any of the discussions we have with Douglas this evening, then you can do so by tweeting at us. If you follow us at Broadcast Scot, you can then use the hashtag Scotland@7, and then as you can see, we'll be flashing some of those tweets up on the screen as we go. But Douglas, to come to you now, were there any of those stories that really jumped out at you today?
Well, I think Alison Thulis's call again for an extension of the furlough scheme really strikes a chord, I think, probably in every single constituency, the length and breadth of the country. You know, we've had the furlough in place for a few months, and what we're picking up, as everybody else is probably realising as well, that once that level of support is withdrawn, especially in key sectors, then it is going to have a direct correlation to the level of unemployment, because there'll be companies in there who are just not prepared to maintain their workforce, or can't maintain their workforce as things stand at the moment. So we've been asking for some time, both the Chancellor and to every opportunity that it's been possible in the House, to ask for the furlough scheme to be extended, so we can actually keep people employed during this time. It's for me, it's really important, especially for smaller businesses as well, and those maybe operating in really vulnerable sectors at the moment. such as maybe tourism and hospitality, to have these sectors really better supported than they are.
Yeah, absolutely. But Douglas, we have got you here to talk about Brexit and what that means, particularly in your constituency. So, first of all, I thought we would just see. I know you've not been in the House of Commons itself, but obviously you've still had a lot of work to do. From your perspective as an MP, then, how has the Brexit process been going over the last few months?
Right. Well, that's the best question I've heard for a while. How's the Brexit process been going? Well, I think as far as the Commons has been concerned, then I think from an SNP perspective, I think we've been trying to make the case as best we can, right from the very time that we knew that that Brexit was going to be a reality, going back to the referendum. We anticipated at that point that there'd be some really bad things happening to our economy, and in terms of exports, in terms of things like food standards, all these things would be under threat. But I don't think it's I don't think we really anticipated how bad things would be in terms of having our say within the House of Commons. And while we've made these points, we've made these arguments, it's been like a steamroller of Tory votes that have pushed things through. And really, we've been watching, despite the best efforts of the Scottish Government as well. I think we've been sidelined and just been in a position where we've been watching things happen to Scotland. We've been watching a series of negotiations that have been mishandled from day one. You remember a few years ago when the negotiations begun, and we had pictures of little bits of paper that were sticking out somebody's briefcase that said, let's have our cake and eat it. Well, that has never ever come to light. The UK have not been in a position to argue the case or negotiate well during this period, and it's just gone, for me, it's just gone from one embarrassment to another. And sitting on the sidelines and feeling that you can't really do that much to change the way of thinking that sits either within the Cabinet Office or within 10 Downing Street or within the Treasury, then that's been a real frustration, I think, for every single Scottish MP, or certainly every Scottish MP who's not part of the government.
And I wonder then, does the fact that so many of the SNP group haven't actually been in Westminster over the last few months, do you think that's made a difference? Obviously, you've still been participating in committees and in the chamber itself, but there's a lot of stuff gets done kind of behind the scenes. Do you think there's been something missing there?
Well, it could be that there is certainly when you're not in daily contact with people, maybe you miss out a little bit. But we've had a core staff, both on staff side and in terms of MPs. So we've had a core group down in Westminster since lockdown, and that's been our strategy throughout, so that we try and keep people down there. And I know Ian Blackford, for example, has been down a few times and had discussions with various other parties in the way that we wanted things to go forward. But I think even if we'd all been there, then I don't think the mood music would be that different. I think that the issue still stems around the fact that we have a government that even from Theresa May's time that wanted to push ahead with a really hard Brexit. Since Boris has been Prime Minister, it's been a really hard Brexit, or let's go for a no deal. And I just sense with the new group of Tory MPs who were elected in December 2019, then that dynamic within that group has changed as well, so that a no deal was much more of an acceptable option for the Tory party and the Tory government, whereas we've been vehemently opposed to not only Brexit, but we've been vehemently opposed to coming out of Europe without an agreed deal with the other 27 states.
Yeah. So, when you look at this, the UK government has kind of almost determinedly avoided a lot of consultation with the devolved governments in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. They seem to have been trying to antagonise the EU at times. What do you think is the strategy guiding this, or are the Tories just really flying by the seat of their pants?
Well, I think that's the very phrase that we could be using because, I remember sitting in a trade bill committee, must be coming up for 18 months to almost 2 years ago now, where we were discussing with small businesses and their representatives how easy they would find it to trade in a no deal situation. And at that point, they were saying we're really worried that even with a deal, then the infrastructure at various ports and airports and so on, the infrastructure will not be in place to actually support a lot of goods being moved in both directions. So, lo and behold, we've come through that period of time, and within the last couple of weeks, we've now had confirmation that hardly any of the necessary infrastructure is in place to allow these exports and imports to take place. Some companies rely almost exclusively on selling their goods into Europe. Others depend on goods coming the other way as part of the supply chain, so they can't make the goods here because they're maybe waiting for a piece of equipment from Italy or Spain or something like that. So, you know, I just feel that the government have put companies in real serious jeopardy of taking their business forward because of this sheer lack of preparation. And the way that, as you suggested, the way that the UK government has engaged with Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales has just been, to say we're a family of nations, just shoots that argument in the foot. There's absolutely no indication that the UK government are interested in maintaining these good relationships or respecting the wishes of some of the other nations that are within the United Kingdom.
So, Douglas, at this stage, obviously, a deal hasn't been done. A number of people kind of have been making more hints in the last few days that a deal was on the horizon, that there was still a deal possible. I wonder, what's your feeling about what's actually going to happen? Do you expect this to be the comprehensive deal that covers everything that's been kind of talked up by Boris Johnson? Or do you think we're going to end up with something a lot more limited that just is a bare bones kind of avoiding the worst kind of deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the maybe a start of a longer process. I don't think either side will get what they want from this situation, and it could take a long time to actually establish um, a proper working relationship between the EU 27 and the UK, and at the same time, the UK will be having an eye elsewhere on other bilateral deals that they can do with other countries, and for me, it is just a complete mess. It's a shambles, and what we need to do in Scotland is really start to really imagine, I think, what it would be like if we were a member state in our own right. We need to start thinking about the kind of Scotland we want to be part of, we want to live in, we want to raise our families in. And, I'm not sure if the work that can be done in Westminster um, really will save the day in terms of the Brexit deal. I think there's we've done everything we can to almost encourage the UK to save itself from
Mm.
its stupidity. But I think we're now at a stage where uh, we just need to let go of that chapter in our history and make sure that we can protect Scotland in other ways. And when we have the opportunity to vote for an independent Scotland, then I don't see any reason why that shouldn't be accepted wholeheartedly by the people of Scotland. We can make the case that Scotland would be a successful country within the EU. We believe that Scotland would, contribute more than its fair share, and there's opportunities there, I think, for Scottish business to actually make the most of that in the same way as, say, the Irish have done within the EU. They've really used the European Union to bolster their economy, to support their business, and to create jobs and prosperity in their own country. And there's absolutely no reason why Scotland should do the same. So maybe it's about thinking about switching off the taps for Westminster and recalibrating our arguments and our campaigning to focus on independence.
Now, obviously, a lot of businesses are going to be affected by Brexit, whatever happens. I mean, whatever kind of deal is in place, it's going to put a lot of changes into the system. I wonder, when you've been talking to businesses, whether they're exporters, importers, whatever it is they do, what has the consultation been like? Are businesses confident, do you think, that they can make the changes that are needed in the time that remains?
Well, the story that I suggested to you earlier about the small business, when they were Federation of Small Business, when they were giving evidence to our committee, even at that time, 18 months ago, they weren't confident that things would work out in time, and they weren't seeing the changes on the ground that would give them confidence to carry on with what the trade they were already engaged in. What has happened, I think, since then as well, is that nothing really has moved on. I think people are still looking for answers to some fairly basic questions about trade between the EU and the UK. We had one really good example this week. I was speaking to the Scottish Engineering, and they told me of a company in Fife who make refuse bin trucks. So what they do at the moment is they're maybe buying their chassis from Mercedes-Benz, for example, and then they'll build a lorry around that, adding the hopper system to take the bins in the back, and a cab for the guys who collect the bins in your street, things like that. And what we've identified there, and it's a real sad tale, is that that process will now add something like 10% onto the costs of that company, because what happens is that when they buy in their chassis, make the vehicle, when they try and export that vehicle, it will carry a tariff if they export it back into the EU. Whereas a German company, for example, they can make these vehicles, call them like finished vehicles, and there's no tariff that's applied. So I've got constituents writing to me just now to say, if that goes ahead, we're going to be much less competitive than we ever were before. But probably our vehicles are probably just as good, or maybe even better, than the ones that might be built in Germany or France or Italy. But we'll have a 10% tariff that will be applied to our vehicles, which makes it much more difficult for that company to export in the future. And these are the kind of stories that we're getting, apart from the ones that are like for small business, who just don't have the resource within their company to spend a lot of time for filling in the forms that are required to get things through customs, and making sure that their goods are compliant with EU law and so on. And it's going to be every sector, from manufacturing to food and drink, to you name it. It's going to be affected by, if they're involved in exporting and importing, then they're going to be affected by the regulations that come in, and the burning hoops that they'll need to jump through in order to carry on their business as it was. And every time you make a change, you're adding costs to the process. And if you're adding costs to the process, it just makes life much more difficult. And not only that, but it disadvantages your product against something that's built in the EU.
Yeah. Well, I mean, haulage and exports and imports are one of the big things we do want to talk about. But we've just before we get on to talking about your constituency and how that plays into things, we've heard about things like these Kent access permits, your passport to Kent, and then there's things like permits for hauliers going into the EU. How concerned are you about how quickly those kind of things can be issued? Because clearly, if a deal is not done until quite late, the details aren't clear. Maybe hauliers don't know what to apply for until it's quite late. Are you concerned about there being a bottleneck at the end of the year?
Well, I think that's where all the predictions lie. That there will be a bottleneck in the processing of all that documentation, but also a physical bottleneck in terms of Scottish companies trying to get their goods into market. We've seen examples of lots of perfectly good arable land in the south of England being ploughed over and concreted over to create lorry parks. And, you know, it's just, again, it just comes back to my point about being so frustrated about this system. I mean, imagine trying to, when you've got a limited amount of money at the moment, as the government has because of COVID, imagine you're putting money into something that should have been totally unnecessary, building lorry parks so food can rot in the back of a lorry while it's sitting for 2 days on its way to Dover, and its trip through Kent and onto the EU. It's
Mhm.
just, it must be so frustrating for anybody running business at the moment. But equally, it's from a citizen's point of view to see that taxpayers' money being used for such a negative purpose when we have 101 things that we could be spending that money on in a much more positive way.
Well, I know one of the things that you would like to spend some money on is developing Rosyth. Now, before you were an MP, you were a councillor for Rosyth and North Queensferry, is that right?
That's
Um,
correct, yeah.
so obviously, Rosyth is very close to your heart. Um, why do you think Rosyth is so quiet just now? I mean, it's been a couple of years since there have been regular ferries out of Rosyth. What's gone wrong, and why do you think there's not been any great enthusiasm to restart something there?
Well, I think that the ferries that did operate were hugely popular. And any time that I put anything into the press or have an opportunity to discuss it with anyone, they'll regale me with stories of the ferries they used to take to, from Rosyth into Zeebrugge in Belgium, and tell me about how good that ferry system was. Uh, Over the years, the first ferry was a Greek company, and that was then taken over by DFDS, Norfolk Line. And quite honestly, if I was reading between the lines, I would suggest that the reason that was an acquisition by DFDS was simply to run down the ferry service from Rosyth so that they could divert more traffic through Hull and other ports that they were wanted to promote south of the border. So, and it's not a Scotland versus England thing for me, but it just makes sense to me that we have a huge number of lorries that go down either the A1 or the M74 every single day of the week on their way to a European destination, and cross the channel. I just think that the opportunity might be there to build back better and
Mhm.
make sure that if we can attract an operator into Rosyth and linking up with, say, Zeebrugge again, or maybe into Rotterdam, for example, or the other port that's been suggested is out near Groningen and more closer to the German border.
Mhm.
Uh, if we could re-establish that ferry service, I think that the trade would be there, both in freight and in passenger services, and it would. I think it'd be hugely successful in both directions. businesses want to avoid delay at Dover and the southern ports. And if you want to do that, then you've got to come up with other solutions. And part of that solution needs to involve Rosyth, and it needs to have a direct daily service in both directions to make sure that we can fulfil the need.
Mm-hmm. And the UK government has, as you said, they've been throwing a lot of money at building lorry parks in Kent. They've been trying to help some of these other ports upgrade. Why have they not taken any interest in redeveloping Rosyth?
Well, I think it's like a whole range of different things. We, the Tory government keep talking about levelling things up, but unfortunately, the level up, or their intention is to level up as far as north, Berwick-on-Tweed. Their intention to level up is as far north as probably Carlisle, and they just don't see the potential that goes beyond the Hadrian's Wall. And it's been quite clear that in other areas, for example, in terms of putting money into the Towns Fund, for example, we've got it on good record that the minister in charge of that fund actually said in a meeting that he wanted a fund that would avoid the UK government paying anything to Scotland in terms of Barnett consequentials. So they came up with a scheme that actually, it took the possibility of including Barnett consequentials in the funding, took it completely out their way of thinking. And subsequently, Scottish Towns didn't receive anything in funding from that funding source. So it's that kind of thinking that is prevalent in Whitehall at the moment, I think, that is designed not to think beyond the border. And we all know that the Scottish Government have a limited pot of money that they receive every year. And we've got to work our finances around what is given to us through Barnett consequentials. So that's Scottish taxpayers' money that goes to the Treasury. They whirl it round in a big barrel or whatever, and then we get some of that back. And what they're trying to do is actually say, well, don't give them as much as they really should be getting, because we want to skew the funding that will actually disadvantage Scotland in the long term. And while that can maybe happen for maybe a year, if that's going to happen for the next 5 years of this Parliament, then we'll be in a much worse position than in terms of our infrastructure funding and our support for our country than people could ever imagine. It's going to be really, really tough going to try and balance a budget in Scotland where we don't have the powers to borrow, where we don't, where we see a skewing of the figures and funding that is going to maybe English regions, but is not making its way over Hadrian's Wall.
So, you talked a bit about the UK government and the limitations on the Scottish government, but what support have you had from Holyrood? Has there been any kind of helping you maybe talk to ferry companies about getting back in there? Is there anything that the Scottish government could do you think?
Well, I think they've got some levers that they could use, and we've had various discussions with Michael Matheson over the last year or so to try and see where the Scottish government could help. It's not that they're reticent to help. I think they're looking for a real business plan that will be sustainable in the long term, and that's exactly what my position is as well. I don't want a ferry that comes in and is somehow underfunded or is sort of lacking the market that would sustain a ferry over 5, 10, 15 years. And that's the way we need to be looking at things. We need to, again, if we're building back better, we need to try and make sure that things are there for the longer term and that it's not just good money after bad. But I think with the right political will, with the actual investment from the private sector, and preferably the private sector within Scotland, we could actually have a really vibrant ferry service that runs between Rosyth and into say Zeebrugge or Rotterdam and then let's try and build on that. Let's look at towards Denmark the next time, and see if we can build on that one ferry service to maybe Aarhus or one of the Esbjerg in Denmark, and actually start to put our money where our mouth is in terms of being really good European citizens, because that's part of our argument as well, that we want to trade, we want to continue to do business with other parts of Europe, but we need that vital infrastructure in place as well that would allow us to do that. And I don't think if the right deal came along, I don't think the Scottish government would be found wanting. I think they'd be right behind it. But it's been a bit of a trial, just finding the right investor to come along with the right plan to make sure that it happens. And sometimes I feel a wee bit like Bruce and the Spider. That's I'm continually, climbing up that web, and if we get knocked back once, then you get back and climb up again and make sure that it's kept at the very forefront of thinking across Scotland. And one day I'm sure the Bruce will get his wish, and we'll have that ferry link between Scotland and the rest of Europe. And let's hope it's sooner rather than later.
Well, you have been doing your spider impression for the last couple of years, pretty consistently. What kind of support have you had? Are hauliers, for example, interested in this idea?
Well, we did have really good discussions with a Scottish company towards the end of last year. Unfortunately, there was parts of the deal that just didn't hang together very well. But it wasn't for the want of trying. I can assure you that. But one of the really good positive things that came out of that was the discussions they did have with hauliers in Scotland, and I think there's a ready market there to be tapped into. I think hauliers would really get behind it if we could prove it was a really good, reliable, fairly fast, daily service, and working in both directions every day. I think that's the kind of ferry we should be trying to aim towards, and it opens up a whole market as well in terms of tourism. I think people are a bit loath to jump on a plane at the moment, not just for COVID reasons, but I think for environmental reasons as well. And there's a whole big market there once the COVID situation maybe gets back to normal, as it were, and people have a bit more confidence about travelling into different countries. Then I think the market will be there, and it opens up a market such as the motorhome and motorbike market. That people don't always want to fly to somewhere. They want to take their car, or they want to take their camper van, or whatever. And Scotland's ideally placed for these kind of holidays in the future as well. So maybe to bring their electric vehicle to Scotland and travel around the country. Scotland at its best is probably the most fantastic country in Europe, but I'm a wee bit biased on that one. But I think people who do come to Scotland for the first time are really impressed by a lot of things that we can offer here. And as I say, once it's safe to do so, then I'd hope that that's one aspect of the tourism market that a ferry service would really support very well. And I think just not from the hauliers point of view, but also from the tourist industry point of view. We've had really good feedback from the Visit Scotland and other bodies and individual companies as well who do tours. They've been really keen to see the ferry service re-established, and if it helps all these different sectors within the Scottish economy, then I think that's all good news all round.
Now, obviously, if a new ferry service were to be introduced, potentially more than one new ferry service that you've described, that would have quite an impact on the local economy. Do you have any research into what kind of impact it could have locally?
Well, I think if you're visiting any other port facility that has a major ferry service, I think you can see that the infrastructure around that port soon picks up and grows, and some of it is sort of fairly low-key jobs, maybe in terms of warehousing or some logistics hubs, and that's the kind of work I think that we would see in the area around about Rosyth. There's certainly plenty of land that was left in that area by the Royal Navy when they moved out a good number of years ago. So there is access to land for warehousing and creating these logistic areas where goods can be brought in, maybe sort of divvied up for Asda or Aldi or Tesco or whatever, and sent out to various parts of Scotland. We do have a rail link in that area as well, which again means that if things are coming off a ship, then they can be put straight onto the railway system, and it's right next to the East Coast Main Line. So again, there's opportunities there to move more freight, not just by sea, which is a very efficient way of moving freight around the world, but also once it's here, we can move by rail as well, which again, if we're coming back to the idea of building back better and a more environmentally friendly kind of society, if we can take lorry miles off the road and get that freight onto rail, then again, that's what's there not to like about that? That's us heading precisely in the right direction in terms of looking after the environment for the future and making sure that we still remain competitive and remain in business and make sure that we can get our exports into market.
And obviously, this would have an impact on the national economy as well. You've mentioned tourism. Obviously, it would be beneficial to Scottish exporters that don't have to ship things all the way to Dover to get them out of the country, potentially, as we've said, with a couple of days delay after Brexit. So do you have any idea what kind of difference this could make overall to the Scottish economy if we had that direct line to Europe from Rosyth?
Well, again, I think Brexit just puts everything into perspective because, possibly one of the reasons why a ferry service didn't always do well was because it was maybe, much more efficient to run a lorry from, say, Dunbar to into France, for example, or carry maybe goods from Cumbernauld into Italy or whatever by road. I think this really gives us an opportunity to change the way we do things. Every company I've spoken to so far has said, well, we'd start off with maybe a couple of ships that were already in service somewhere in Europe, and then eventually we'd run our own ships from Rosyth, which again, a new build ship that was designed for that particular route is a great thing to have as well. And within modern technology, for example, in shipping, a lot of things are going to more green sources of fuel. So things like hydrogen, for example, hydrogen ships. Again, just coming back to a recurring theme here about building back better. Again, if we can have a new fleet of hydrogen-powered ships going from Scotland into Europe, again, it's just reducing our carbon footprint, but at the same time making sure that we're still doing business with other parts of Europe. And I think that one thing that Donald Dewar said when he was giving his first speech in the Scottish Parliament, he was talking about it's how we hold ourselves as a nation, and I don't think there's any doubt that seeing a ship full of passengers from either Europe or full of Scottish passengers going into Europe, I think that sends a clear message about how we hold ourselves, how we respect each other, how we are prepared to trade, to share experiences, and so on, and with other nations. And I think that's a great way forward for Scotland as well. So it's not just about somebody somewhere making money or keeping people in jobs, but it's also having these commercial and social links between various countries. And I think, again, that's for me, that's a a great advert for Scotland in the future as well, and the kind of country that we want to be part of, and the kind of country we want to live in.
Yeah. Now you have brought up independence a number of times, and you're talking about the future now. So, how
And
important
why
would it
not?
be in an independent Scotland for us to have a direct link to Europe like that?
Yeah, well, again, I think for all these reasons, I think it's absolutely essential that we have that direct link, and for all the reasons I've given, it's I think from my perspective, again, it would just be unthinkable for Scotland as an independent country. The only way we could trade with Europe would be to send all our goods through another country to get there, when we've got perfectly good means of dealing direct with other countries, of whoever wants to trade with us, whoever wants to come on holiday to Scotland, and for Scots who want to go abroad for a holiday or a break. So there's absolutely no reason why Scotland shouldn't be placed in that position. And when you look at some of the Scandinavian countries and the superb ferry links and connectivity that they have, then it just makes me exceptionally jealous that they've got such good connectivity in using the sea and seaways between countries, that just give them that added edge when it comes to getting their goods into the market they need to go to. And
Hmm.
Scotland's got a huge number of things that we need to export. So let's build our economy around making sure that the export trade is put to the fore, and that we can actually produce things that people in other parts of Europe actually want to buy.
Hmm. Well, on that note, obviously a connection to Zeebrugge only gives a great access to one part of Europe. There is Scandinavia, and there's also Ireland. I wonder what your thoughts are on connections, perhaps from Aberdeen or somewhere else further north than Rosyth, going to Norway, Iceland, places like that, and also what you think about developing better connections with Ireland, potentially also facing some constitutional change in the coming years.
Yeah, well, I mean, Ireland themselves have built, I think, two absolutely what they called Brexit Buster ferries, which seem to be about the size of a small city. Uh,
Hmm.
but I think the opportunities for Scotland to do business with Ireland are. Uh, I think that would be a very, very positive relationship in the future, and I think we can see already, when you see people like Fiona Hislop and Mike Russell, for example, meeting up with their equivalent numbers in either the Republic or in Northern Ireland. I think the sense of warmth is always quite significant, and I think that's a relationship I think we would carry on as being, if we were ever in a position where we were the new 28th state of the EU. I think one of our warmest and closest relationships would be that with Ireland. But during COVID as well, we've also made a lot of really good connections with very small places like the Faroes, Iceland, and Norway. And again, everything that we hear from these countries is that they want Scotland to be part of the international community, and they want to investigate what we've got to offer and build up these relationships as well. So I have absolutely no doubt that between ourselves and Rosyth and other ports to the north, the opportunities are there, especially if the Arctic opens up as a seaway. One of the only upside of global warming, I think, to date has maybe been the sea ice has melted to the north of Norway and into north of Russia, and it's probably not an upside at all, but at least there's shipping that is now happening for months on end, during each
Hmm.
year. I think places like Aberdeen and maybe a bit further north into Caithness and so on, probably ideally placed to be part of that new frontier, if you like, that will open. It's not ideal because I don't think it's not a good situation for the environment in terms of the
No,
future of
no.
the Arctic. But it's probably going to happen. So how do we actually make the best of that development,
Yeah.
and how do we work with other countries such as Norway and Iceland and some of the other Nordic countries to actually work out what's the best way of dealing with some of the issues that will be raised by that.
So, one of the stories we mentioned earlier on, talking about independence, was this survey showing some support or at least some comfort level of some big businesses. These were all FTSE 500 companies with the idea of independence. Most of them saying they expect it to happen, first of all, and then most saying that they're comfortable with it. They're not. It's not going to cause any great crisis for their companies. That's quite a different story from what we heard for most of the campaign in 2014. I wonder, what do you think the big difference is between then and now?
Oh, I think people are getting. I think people are actually seeing the difference in terms of maybe through Brexit, and certainly the way that Scotland has been treated over the last 3 or 4 years. I think it has resonated in parts of England as well, that it never resonated like this before. I mean, I think the fact that Scotland is being seen as being kept at the door while the UK government makes the decisions. I think that kind of message has been getting through to the wider public, and I think there's less. Um, I suppose I'm hearing less stories of from England that would say, "Oh, you could never make it on your own. What would you do without our support?" Blah blah blah. And I think the mood music around that is changing. I think people are beginning to realise that Scotland has got a pretty bad deal. We voted for to remain by 62%,
Hmm.
and there's people in England who know that that has been completely trashed over the last few years. So I think there's a realization there, but there's also a realization, I think, amongst business people who still see Scotland as being part of their market, part of
Hmm.
their trading bubble, if you like. I don't suspect that the fears around um, independence that we had in 2014, I don't think some of these fears are going to go very far this time, because they've tried that in the past, and we've seen from this poll today that that it's having that fear factor is having less of an impact, and people realise that Scotland will still be there, England will still be there. We talked a lot about international trade tonight between ourselves and Europe,
Hmm.
and the rest of Europe. But there'll still be a huge amount of trade that goes on between Scotland and England after Scotland becomes independent, and that will continue. We'll need to find different ways of doing it, but it will continue. I think yeah, I'll still be eating Eccles cakes. There'll be people in England who still want to drink Scotch whisky. It's just going to be a bit different, but we'll still want to trade as two nations. And I think any normal business person looking at this as a proposition won't see it as a huge problem.
Yeah.
We've got hundreds
And
of multinational companies who trade with countries the other side of the globe. Why wouldn't you want to trade with your nearest neighbour who's
yeah.
got a land border with you? And there will be issues around that, but they're not unsurmountable.
And just quite quickly, then, before we wrap up, if we are looking at an independence referendum next year, as has been mooted, what do you expect to happen, both in terms of how the business world responds and in terms of how the campaign itself goes down?
I really do think we need to think a lot more about creating that vision of the kind of Scotland that we want to be part of. For our own citizens, we need to think about creating that vision of a Scotland that is international in its outlook and able to take on responsibilities that you would expect of any other normal country. And I think that's where the focus needs to be, to make sure that people want to be part of that, that they, even if they voted no in 2014, that they buy into the kind of Scotland that would be successful, the kind of Scotland that would be maybe a bit more caring, and would be much more prosperous. And I think there's lots of examples across Northern Europe, small countries, medium-sized countries, doing really well for themselves. And I think that's the kind of model that we should be looking at and saying we can learn some things from the way the Danes do this or the Norwegians do that. We can't replicate it. We're a different breed. We're a different kind of country altogether. But there are lessons to be learned about how other countries do things. And I think if we can put examples in front of people to say this is the kind of Scotland, this is what it could be like if we so decided, then I think that's the key to making sure that we can get beyond what 52, 55, 60% of the population, even more, I would imagine, who would want to be part of that new Scotland that we're trying to create.
Well, that's a perfect place to end the show tonight. We are just about out of time. So, Douglas Chapman, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. And thank you to you at home for joining us as well. There would be no point in us making these shows if you weren't here to watch them. So, thank you so much for that. We do have to ask, if you're able to support us, that you do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register and sign up there as a supporter. Your £5 a month is a big, big part of what keeps the lights on here at Broadcasting Scotland, as well as helping us do all the other things we want to do in building a better broadcaster for Scotland. So if you are able to support us financially, then please do. If you're not, we do understand the shows will always be free to view online, so you don't need to worry about that. But what you can do is follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, find our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and subscribe there. You can then please share the shows around. Word of mouth from you is the best way for us to spread the word about what we do here and to get more viewers watching, which is how we're going to grow. So if you're able to do that, do please talk to your friends, your family, random strangers in the street about Broadcasting Scotland. Let them know where we are and what we do. And finally, if you'd like to get involved here at Broadcasting Scotland, we're always looking for volunteers, whether it's in front of the camera or behind the camera. There are lots of opportunities here. So if you're interested in getting involved in helping us build that better broadcaster for Scotland, then do please get in touch as soon as you can. But that is absolutely all we have time for tonight. So once again, thank you so much to Douglas Chapman MP for his time this evening. I will be back on Sunday with the full Scottish, and then Gordon will be back on Monday with Scotland at 7. But until then, thanks for joining us and have a great weekend. Good night. Super.